Max Verstappen has won the 2022 World Drivers' Championship, and he did it by a pretty big margin. But exactly how many races did it take him to win that championship? Spoiler alert, Max won 12 races in 2022 to win the World Championship. Let's go all the way back to the start of the season and see how all of that unfolded. Saudi Arabia was actually the first Grand Prix that Max won in 2022, where he lined up on the second row with Perez on pole position. We did get some pure entertainment from Fernando Alonso on lap 7, narrowly missing his teammate Esteban Ocon whilst making a hell of an overtake on the main straight. Lap 15 and Perez pitted from the lead of the race, so things weren't looking that good for Max. However, the racing gods were on hand to give him some luck in the form of a crash from Nicholas Latifi on lap 16, causing a safety car. Max pitted under the safety car, and Leclerc, who was in P2, stayed out and inherited the lead of the race, albeit on slightly older tyres than Max. The race restarted on lap 21 and Max stayed in P2 until lap 37 when Daniel Ricciardo had an engine failure in his McLaren. This was game on for Max, and he managed to squeeze past the race leader Charles Leclerc on lap 42, only for Charles to get him back on the next lap. So it was Max in P2 and Charles in P1. However, we only needed a few more laps, lap 46, for a somewhat maturing move from Max, waiting for the most optimum moment to overtake and breeze past the Ferrari to take the lead. Win number 2 came at Imola, and Max started on pole after winning the sprint race. He stormed off in the wet after a bad start by Charles Leclerc. In typical Max fashion, this was a lovely Sunday, with his teammate behind him, and as usual, his teammate wasn't able to match his superior pace. By lap 12, Max had already built a gap to his teammate. Any guesses how big that gap was after only 12 laps? 5 seconds. Yes, that's right, 5 seconds behind him to his teammate in an identical car. Remember, this is only race 3 of the season, and he's already showing how much pace he has. From here, things just got better for the Dutchman. On lap 53, Charles Leclerc had a moment pushing too hard and taking too much curb in his scarlet red Ferrari, resulting in him losing the car and crashing into the wall. He did manage to keep the car running, but it just made Max's day even easier. It was a good recovery from Charles, but inevitably Max crossed the line with his teammate behind him and a gap of 16 seconds. Yeah, that's right, 16 seconds. This was a pretty early indication of how strong Max's year was going to be. We're on to win number 3, and this came at the first ever Miami Grand Prix hosted at the incredible Dolphin Stadium. Charles Leclerc was on pole and Max started the race in P3. Off the line, Charles looked quick, and I emphasise the word looked quick. Max was putting in some stellar laps behind him, and on lap 9 the crowd erupted as Max put in a phenomenal move to overtake the Monegascan. From there it was another lovely Sunday. We did get a safety car on lap 41 though, because of a crash between Pierre Gasly and Lando Norris. With this race, Max didn't have his trusty teammate behind him. Unfortunately, he had 2 prancing horses. But as you can imagine, this didn't really faze Max. He crossed the line to take win number 3 of the season. Win number 4, and we head to Spain. Max actually started in P2 for this race on the grid and didn't manage to jump the Ferraris at the race start. From there, it does get worse for Max. On lap 9, he lost the car and ended up in the gravel trap. Very uncharacteristic from Max. Not a lovely Sunday. Or was it? Martin Brundle suspected that this was a gust of wind that caused Max to lose the car. Carlos Sainz did have a similar problem in the Ferrari a few laps earlier. Fortunately, Max managed to keep the car running and came back onto the track in P3, so all was not lost for the Dutchman. George Russell, though, was his next problem. The Mercedes driver fighting hard in P2. As this was happening, absolute disaster for Ferrari, but a stroke of luck for Red Bull. Remember Charles Leclerc, the race leader? Well, no, not the race leader anymore. His Ferrari lost power and he retired the car, leaving George Russell out in the lead of the race. However, after a pit stop from Perez, George was passed for the lead. Lap 47, and we repeat those famous words from years ago from Ferrari engineer Rob Smedley. But this time it was Perez and his race engineer telling him, Max is on a different strategy. If he's quicker, let him through. Essentially saying, move out the way for your teammate. Perez replied, this is very unfair, but okay. And there we have it, win number 4 for Max. Win number 5 takes us back to Azerbaijan, and Max must have come here with some bad memories. After that win was snatched away from him in 2021 with a tyre failure on the main straight. Anyway, back to 2022, and it was actually his teammate Perez that shined initially, overtaking the Ferrari to take the lead of the race. Lap 9 and Carlos Sainz had an engine failure, causing a virtual safety car. Charles Leclerc came straight into the pits for a tyre change. So it was Perez in P1 with Max behind him in P2. That was until lap 14, when Max showed his superior pace, passing the Mexican under DRS and streaming out in front. Lap 20 and Ferrari had yet another engine failure, making it another lovely Sunday for Max. The end of the race came and it was another win for Max, with another big gap behind him to his teammate in the same car. How big was that gap? 20 seconds. Yes, 20 seconds after starting behind his teammate on the grid. Win number 6, and we're back to the famous Canada Grand Prix, with Max actually starting on pole this race. Fernando Alonso was also next to him in P2, an absolutely stellar performance from Alonso in the Alpine to qualify in P2. As expected, Max stormed off with his teammate retiring on lap 9, which caused a virtual safety car. However, by this point, he already had a 5-second gap to Carlos Sainz behind him. However, Red Bull did grab the opportunity for a cheap pit stop under the virtual safety car, with Sainz and Alonso staying out. Max got caught behind Lewis Hamilton after pitting later in the race, which, as you can imagine, made Max rather unhappy. However, he did breeze past him pretty easily. Lap 49, and we got a full safety car after Yuki Tsunoda crashed out in his AlphaTauri. So we had Max in P2 and Carlos ahead, who pitted under the safety car for new tyres, leaving Max out in the lead of the race. Carlos did catch up behind Max on the restart, but he wasn't quick enough to get past the defending world champion. Win number 7, and we're in France. Max started in P2 with Charles leading the way in pole position, and Charles looked to have this race all wrapped up. It looked like he had the pace over Max Verstappen. Yes, you did hear that right. Charles Leclerc was quicker during a race than Max. It looked like it was all but over for Max. He tried to get past the Ferrari, but he wasn't quite quick enough and even had to pit on lap 17. However, lap 19 came along and it turned into yet another lovely Sunday for Max. With Charles crashing out all on his own, it looked like he was pushing that car just a little bit too hard. You have to feel for Ferrari and for Charles Leclerc. It was their race to win, but yet again they failed to capitalise on it. So Max now had 185 World Championship points and 7 race wins in 2022. The Hungarian Grand Prix brought about win number 8 for Max. In this race, he actually started way back in 10th on the grid, so it didn't look like a particularly good Sunday for him, with Ferrari and Mercedes on the front at a track that is very difficult to overtake on. After making a few overtakes, Max eventually pitted on lap 39 and made his final pit stop, bringing him out in P5 after making a great undercut on George Russell. Charles Leclerc was the next car up in front of him, and this is when we got possibly the worst ever strategy call from Ferrari, the hard tyre saga. Ferrari opted for a super slow tyre, making it an easy picking for Max as he overtook the Ferrari. Max even had a moment on lap 42, executing a perfect 360. However, this wasn't much of a problem for him. He caught back up to the Ferrari and got past him again, putting him in the lead of the race. Yes, the lead of the race on a track that's hard to overtake on. So that's now 210 points for Max. Win number 9, and it's time for that iconic Grand Prix in Belgium. This win really is unbelievable and shows just how good of a driver Max really is. He started this race from 14th on the grid after taking engine penalties. Red Bull and Max must have gone into the weekend not expecting to get a win here. Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton made contact on the first lap in spectacular fashion, Lewis clipping Alonso's rear tyre and being catapulted up in the air. Skip forward to lap 4 and Max is now in P8. Along comes Latifi and you guessed it, a safety car. What we saw then was nothing other than a masterclass from Max, passing Daniel Ricciardo, Seb Vettel, Alonso, Russell, and that's him now up in P3 after starting 14th, and we're only on lap 8. Next car in front was his teammate, who started the race on the front of the grid. Yes, the front row, and it's only taken Max 12 laps to catch up to him. This shows you how happy he is in the car, and it's really a car that he can drive as he wants to, and how he's driving like a champion. He did have a bit of a moan at the team, obviously wanting Perez out of the way, only to then overtake him on the next lap. After a few more pit stops, it was Max P2 and Carlos Sainz in the lead of the race. Not for long though. Lap 18 and Max breezed past the Ferrari again, and that's a wrap for Max, 14th to 1st in 18 laps. Pretty impressive. He's now got 236 World Championship points and 9 victories. We've hit double figures. We're on to win number 10 and the Dutch Grand Prix, which is a pretty awesome place for win number 10. Max started this race on pole with the 2 Ferraris behind him. Unfortunately for Max, Mercedes did have more pace here, but as it turned out, it wasn't enough to stop him winning that race. With Max out in the lead, Mercedes looked to have pulled a strategy masterclass after opting to start on the hard tyre and only needing to stop twice, unlike Ferrari and Red Bull, who were making 3 stops. What then followed was a rather weird situation on lap 44, with Yuki Tsunoda reporting a loose wheel in his AlphaTauri. He did come straight into the pits, but then subsequently went straight back out again and stopped on track, causing a virtual safety car to be thrown, which meant that Max could now pit under the virtual safety car, lose much less time on his pit stop, and crucially keep the lead of the race. Not something he would have been able to do without the virtual safety car. Having said that, he probably still had the pace to catch up to Lewis on fresh tyres. Anyway, you guessed it, it was yet another lovely Sunday at his home Grand Prix. That's 262 points and 10 race victories. Win number 11, and we're in Monza for the Italian Grand Prix, where Max started in P7. By the end of the first lap, he was now in P4, with Daniel Ricciardo ahead of him in P3. Lap 2, and guess who we got past? Yeah, it's Daniel, and Max is now in P3 on lap 2. George Russell is up next, and on lap 5, Max passed him into the first corner. Pretty good day so far for Max in Monza. So now it's Leclerc in P1 and Max in P2. Then on lap 12, things got a little bit more complicated. Seb Vettel had an engine failure in his Aston Martin, which caused a virtual safety car to be thrown. Charles pitted from the lead, but as he pitted, the virtual safety car ended, leaving Max out in the lead. After a few pit stops, it was Max in the lead, but crucially, Charles was behind him on fresh tyres, so it looked like Max was going to lose out to Charles on that fresh rubber. Then, on lap 47, Daniel Ricciardo had an engine failure in his McLaren, causing the full safety car to deploy, and Max stayed out. The FIA then took the decision to finish the race under the safety car, which effectively gave Max win number 11 and 287 points. Now we get to that championship winning race in Suzuka, which would be win number 12 for Max in 2022. We got a wet race and it did start off well, or should we say the first lap started off well. Yeah, after lap 1 the race was red flagged, with Carlos Sainz going off and Pierre Gasly collecting a large amount of debris on the front of his car. Alex Albon also had to retire his car due to mechanical issues. After around an hour, the race resumed, giving us approximately 40 minutes of racing time, with Max in P1 and Charles behind him in P2. Max then pulled out what can only be described as a massive gap to Charles behind him. By the end of the race, he was 25 seconds clear of Charles behind him. However, what happened next changed everything. Checo Perez was right behind Perez and pushing him right to the last corner. On that last corner, Charles made a mistake and ended up going off track to stay ahead of Perez. The FIA deemed that this was leaving the track and gaining an advantage, handing Charles a 5-second penalty, which meant that his finishing position was now P3 rather than P2. This effectively made Max the world champion for a second time, an incredible achievement. He ended up with 312 World Championship points and 12 wins by the time the Japanese Grand Prix finished. And there you have it. Every race Max won in 2022 to secure his second Drivers' Championship. Thanks so much to everyone that has watched the videos and subscribed. It really does make a big difference.